The Pan-European Navy just got reinforcements in the form of Holland. The quick rundown: she's a large Swedish destroyer with the characteristic ultra-fast torpedoes, strong guns, and great AA, but all without a smokescreen consumable. To make up for this, she also comes with heals. They can keep you a little healthier for longer during the matches. Most would be wondering if it's a torpedo boat or a gunboat, and to that I'd say this ship is both. The guns reload in 2 seconds stock, and Holland comes equipped with 10 torpedoes. They reach 15 kilometers and sail at 86 knots stock. Clearly, this destroyer can do both. When it comes to your ship setup though, to me it doesn't really make sense to build more into the guns because of what I would call diminishing returns. You can't really buff the reload much faster than 2 seconds with things like Mordov. You could build up the HE, I suppose, with that French commander, but what you can really do is make the torpedoes very, very mean and very hard to dodge. And on that note, I'm using Stig Eriksson in this game, focused on the torpedoes with subsurface venture, a little bit of concealment mixed in, Erik Bay and Azerlane Atago to buff the torpedo detectability. I'll show you why here a little bit later. The background game is on Trap, and it showcases the versatility of Holland with her guns and torpedoes. Not the highest damage match, but it shows that this is a destroyer that can win matches, have a pretty good win rate and a high battle impact if you play it correctly. And spoiler alert, we're actually going to lose this match, but as we watch here and see, how the match goes, it shows that you can do everything basically in this ship to try to affect the outcome of matches. But sometimes legendary tier games, especially on update week, it is what it is. Anyways, the Holland, a pretty decent HP pool, although it really is becoming below average in terms of legendary DDs. But to make up for this, again, she comes with heals. They're good for a little over 2,500 health apiece. Better than the Daring's heals, actually. Let me point out, Holland is probably going to need these heals, especially if you play her the way she should be played, and that is using the guns in combination with the torpedoes to get the most out of her. Holland is a pretty easy target to hit because she is slow and unmaneuverable. In destroyer versus destroyer fights, or most anytime you get spotted, you can and will take massive damage from incoming enemy fire. On paper, the maneuverability, it doesn't look that much worse than the gearing or say the daring, but it sure feels like it. Holland feels sluggish, slow to turn, slow to stop and start as well. And on top of that, on paper, she is the slowest destroyer at legendary tier now at 35 knots. And you might notice you don't get a speed boost consumable. Just like we were pointing out there, the A gear fires one salvo and we get absolutely smashed. And that was just kind of my experience playing Holland. Like you open up, even large caliber ships from across the map, they can smash you. Anyways, moving on. I think gunboating in open water is still okay. It's definitely a way to play this ship, but you have to be careful when you're getting shot back at. One saving grace seems to be the gun firing angles. Rearward, when kiting away, you have some amazing gun angles, and it's going to help make you a lot harder to hit, make you a smaller profile. The gun reload, like mentioned, is 2 seconds, and that is pretty fast. That's actually the fastest stock reload at the tier, although you don't have as many guns as the gearing and as the daring. In terms of damage output though, your HE shells, you're actually going to beat out the British legendary destroyer by just a little bit. I wouldn't expect to smoke one straight up in a gunfight, but you do have the better DPM on paper. The shells feel floaty, kind of like British HE on destroyers usually does, so aiming at longer ranges can be a little more difficult. The fire chance is great, 8%. It means you're a pretty decent fire spammer. When it comes to larger ships like battleships, you can farm them out pretty well. Overall, the guns are respectable. If you built into them more, I'm curious what you could get, but I don't think you can get a whole lot more since you only have 4 of them and they're already really almost maxed out on the reload. On to the torpedoes. Like mentioned, they're heckin' fast. They deal a relatively low amount of alpha damage though when they hit about 10k a piece. When you think of legendary tier ships and torpedo protection, such as Yamato's 55%, you can see that torpedo damage alone is not very strong. What it can earn you a lot of though is flooding damage, especially if you're staggering your torpedo spreads to bait enemy battleships' damage cons. 15 kilometers is really comfortable. I mean, that is a long range, and you can get torps out against a lot of targets all across the map. They reload in 73 seconds, which is also not bad at all. That's pretty quick. The only issue with the torpedo seems to be their detection range. It's 1,800 meters. That means that yes, they're fast, but enemies can see them coming from a long ways away. The solution? If you have her, Azerlane Atago can buff this by 200 meters. What does this do? Stock torpedo reaction time. That means the enemy sees your torpedo sailing towards them and they try to react. Stock, they have 8 seconds. Atago buffs this down to less than 6.8 seconds. That's a pretty decent buff when it comes to torpedoes. It means their reaction time is basically the second best at legendary tier behind the dreaded Khabarovsk. You could try out Fishy, the IJN DD commander, if you really wanted to. It'll buff the reaction time by about half a second, but Atago is the better choice here overall. The AA DPS is awesome. It's 329 and it reaches out to 5.2 kilometers, easily making it the best destroyer AA at legendary tier, and I think in the game, correct me if I'm wrong, but that should be the best in the game. It also gets a DFAA consumable to boot, and that's going to buff it 200% for 40 seconds. I didn't play against any enemy CVs, but I would say that would be pretty catastrophic for an enemy squadron. So as the game is going on in the background, you can see we're losing. Basically, we're losing, but we're doing everything we can. We've already capped 2 capture points, and we're over here working on a 3rd one. And that will kind of be the theme of this game, is just playing, but we're not going to be able to pull out the win in this one. The last stat I would want to point out is Holland's concealment. At 7 kilometers stock, it's about equal to gearing, so buffed, you shouldn't really have any issues here. At legendary tier, it's 5.4 kilometers with Bay as an inspiration, 5.7 without Bay. Destroyer concealment on Legends is much better on average than PC, so I think running without Bay is fine at 5.7. That brings me to the inspirations. I feel like there are so many different directions to go with this ship. One, I like Bay and Sims. They're always good fallback commanders. If you have them at high levels, you can't go wrong, just because they make the boat a little better overall. Sims at 16.3 is going to give you about 3,400 more health. It's like a whole nother heal and some, which again, depending on how aggressive you are, you may need it. Personally, I like Atago to make the torps more viable. Like mentioned, getting more torp hits in a game is pretty big on this ship. Making enemies cycle their damage cons where your teammates can set them on fire, things like that. Those have pretty decent impacts on the battle. Blue, the German destroyer commander, used to buff speed, that's a pretty good inspiration as well. Holland is slow, and similar to the Daring, she doesn't have a speed boost consumable. Blue buffs the speed up by another 0.5. I don't think I have her at that high of a level, 15.2-ish or something like that. Mordov for the guns, again, like I mentioned, diminishing returns, it's only going to buff it about 0.1%, not worth it. There are much better things that you could do to set up your Holland. At the end of the day, though, I think I'm going to stay with Sims and Atago, so a little more survivability since I apparently like to get blapped, and some better torpedoes. Also, if you noticed, I kept Perceptive in slot 3 on my commander rather than doing any of the torpedo skills. I would just much rather know where the nearest enemy ship is. There's lots of destroyers in these LT matches, it seems like. Some of them are pretty slippery players, and just having this little indicator helps quite a bit. There's a battle coming up with the gearing ahead here, and while I kind of knew what the gearing player was going to do, just having the perceptive indicator to kind of back me up and really let me know where he was at and what he was doing helps a lot. Now, Pan-Euro DDs, they're not known for being the easiest destroyers to play. I'd say Holland has a moderate skill floor, but a pretty high skill ceiling. Those who get to know her will have an answer to basically every situation. Decent guns to defend yourself or farm battleships with good fires per minute, torpedoes to fend off capital ships, and destroyers due to their very high speed. It's easy to hit DDs. Strong AA and average concealment to keep you hidden. It's all around a very good destroyer. A mistake or two, though, can leave you hurting due to not having that smoke as a get-out-of-jail-free card, and like mentioned, this thing is a very easy target to hit. I really think she's a fun ship. I don't ever feel helpless in Holland like I do in some destroyers, say Z44 for instance. I feel like anything that comes after you in the Holland you really have an answer to, and they stand to lose a lot of health if they want to trade with guns, or if a big ship is going to push you, they're going to get torped, and if a CV is going to bother you, they're going to lose some planes. My biggest issue with the Holland would be her poor maneuverability. Like the stats say, she's pretty blah in this department, and actually playing her, it feels worse. She doesn't seem to have those quick, choppy, good, smooth movements like the daring or the gearing. It just really hurts in a knife fight. The turret traverse is quite nice, that helps in destroyer versus destroyer fights, but yeah, maneuverability sucks. Also, one other problem with the ship, torp firing angles. They're not great. You nearly have to go full broadside to fire them all, and with her maneuverability, that can be annoying. Overall though, that is just my 2 cents about the Holland. If you liked it, hit the like button. After seeing her in action, I'm curious, do you guys think daring is still the king of the castle? Let me know in the comment section down below, and I'll catch you in the next one. See ya.